Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the ethnic tensions that are destabilizing Ethiopia on its rocky road to democracy. Ethnic violence has engulfed Ethiopia after the murder of prominent ethnically Oromo musician and activist Hachalu Hundessa. For several days the internet was shut down and elections have been postponed. What's going on in Ethiopia? What are the origins of these ethnic tensions? How could this situation unfold under the leadership of Nobel Prize-winning Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed? And how can Ethiopia overcome this ethnic divide? Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and since 2018, Ethiopia has slowly been democratizing its society under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. But that democratization, while bringing many positive changes, has also allowed people to express long-held grievances, often along ethnic lines. Ethiopia is an incredibly diverse country with over 80 different ethnic groups and 100 million people. The largest are the Oromo, who are 35% of the population, the Amhara, who are 26%, the Somali, who are 6%, and the Tigrayans, who are 6%. Religion is another divider, with 62% being Christians, with 43% from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and 18% who are Protestants, and 32% who are Muslims. But to understand the current situation, we have to understand how ethnic differences have been politicized in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was never successfully colonized by any European power. Instead, until 1974, it was an absolute monarchy led by Emperor Haile Selassie. And during the period of the monarchy, in their effort to modernize Ethiopia, the emperors in the 19th and 20th century centralized power in the hands of the Amhara people. Most of the government officials were Amhara, the official language was Amharic, and the people were expected to assimilate into the Amharic culture. In 1974, a military council called the Derg overthrew the monarchy, and the Derg, led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, declared Marxism-Leninism the official ideology of the state. And this resulted in the forced collectivization of agriculture in the style of Joseph Stalin. And there was also an ethnic component to this policy. The government would forcibly resettle Amhara farmers onto the lands of other ethnic groups. These policies not only led to mass starvation and displacement, but also to the formation of ethnically based rebel groups, triggering the Ethiopian Civil War. One of the main rebel groups in this conflict was the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, representing the Tigrayan people. And so in 1989, when these rebel groups united to form the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, or EPRDF, it was dominated by the Tigrayan TPLF faction. And so in 1991, this coalition, the EPRDF, succeeded in overthrowing the communist military regime of Haile Mariam. Now, in order to resolve the ethnic tensions in the country, the EPRDF decided to create an ethnically based system of federalism. That basically meant that each of the major ethnic groups would have their own state where they could run their own affairs, and that they would have equal representation at the federal level. In fact, they even introduced a provision into the Ethiopian constitution that gave every state the right to secede from the union if they wanted to. Eritrea immediately made use of that right and seceded from Ethiopia in 1993. On paper, this looked beautiful, but the reality was very different. You see, the EPRDF, although it was a coalition of different ethnic groups, was dominated by the Tigrayan TPLF. It was the TPLF who had led the rebellion, and it was the TPLF who had the resources and the manpower to run the government. The Oromo and Amhara members of the EPRDF were simply co-opted by the Tigrayan elite. And so where Ethiopia had been dominated for a century by the Amhara, it was now dominated by the Tigrayans, who made up just 6% of the population. Ethiopia was now, for all intents and purposes, a one-party state. But this system of government was not sustainable. Something had to give, and so the spark that lit the fire was something called the Addis Ababa Master Plan. Look at this map. You see, Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, is its own state, but is totally surrounded by the state of Oromia. And so in 2014, the federal government, with its Addis Ababa master plan, wanted to expand the capital city of Addis Ababa by forcibly taking land from Oromo farmers in the surrounding Oromia state with little compensation. And so this move, which was seen as an attack on the Oromo people, led to mass protests in 2015. And the government's response was a brutal crackdown, leaving 700 dead and 23,000 arrested. But this crackdown backfired, and soon the protests blew up to be not just against the Addis Ababa master plan, but against the political and economic marginalization of the Oromo and Amhara people, human rights abuses, and against the government itself. By 2016, the government declared a state of emergency, but the protests continued. By 2018, Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn was forced to resign. Now at this stage, the Tigray elite realized that they had to give something in order to calm down the protesters. And so in 2018, a new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, was chosen, who is of mixed Oromo and Amharic descent and mixed Christian and Muslim background. The Tigray-dominated EPRDF thought that by nominating an Oromo, they could calm tensions and still maintain power. But at this stage, the Oromo and Amhara factions within the EPRDF realized that they could either side with the unpopular federal government or join the side of the protesters and implement reforms. And so that's what they did. The Tigrayan elite was sidelined, and Abiy Ahmed legalized opposition parties and armed groups, freed thousands of journalists and political prisoners, apologized for past mistakes of the government, introduced freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and fired many members of the old government, and promised free and fair elections by the year 2020. And when it came to foreign policy, he made a peace deal with Eritrea to resolve the 20-year border dispute that came from the war back in the 90s that had left 100,000 dead. It was these actions that earned Abiy Ahmed the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. By all indications, Ethiopia was on the path to democracy and ethnic harmony. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. On the one hand, for many in the old elite, the pace of change was too fast, and this resulted in an assassination attempt on Abiy Ahmed in June 2018. On the other hand, the opening of the political space also allowed for the opening of old wounds from long-held grievances. Inter-ethnic violence massively increased, with up to 3 million people being displaced as a result. And in order to respond to this, Abiy Ahmed's government increasingly relied on old habits. In response to the hate speech and disinformation being spread to rile up ethnic tensions, the government crafted a hate speech law that didn't only criminalize the worst instances of hate speech, but also made it easier to prosecute people who disagreed with the government. Several journalists have been jailed using the old anti-terrorism laws. Far fewer journalists than in the past, but it still happens. 2019 alone, the government shut down the internet over 8 times in response to protests. And these kind of actions have brought Abiy Ahmed into conflict with the opposition, who was initially very positive towards the reforms. For instance, media mogul and Oromo nationalist politician Jawar Mohammed has become increasingly critical of Abiy Ahmed and would be a direct challenge to Abiy Ahmed in the elections in his own Oromo heartland. And to prepare for these elections, Abiy Ahmed has ditched the EPRDF and formed his own party, the Prosperity Party, to compete in the elections. And as for the elections, because of coronavirus, they have been indefinitely postponed, which means that Abiy Ahmed would be in power longer than the constitution allows. And that brings us to today. Hachalu Hundessa, an Oromo musician who sang songs about Oromo liberation, was killed on 29 June, sparking a wave of violence. Violence between protesters and police, violence between ethnic mobs. In response, the government temporarily shut down the internet for a week, and in the violence over 239 have been killed and 3,500 arrested. And as part of the crackdown, the government arrested popular Oromo opposition politician Jawar Mohammed. So who killed Hachalu Hundessa? It could have been the Egyptians who want to stop the construction of the massive Renaissance Dam on the Nile River, which would reduce Egypt's water supply, and therefore the Egyptians have an interest in destabilizing Ethiopia. It could also be the old Tigray elites from the TPLF who want to stop the reforms. You see, Abiy Ahmed's new Prosperity Party includes all the factions from the old EPRDF except the Tigrayan TPLF. It could also be Abiy Ahmed's government. Abiy Ahmed's government was very quick to bury the musician and has not released the autopsy report, and was very quick to blame outside and opposition forces. By assassinating Hachalu Hundessa, they would stand to benefit by using it as an opportunity to clamp down on opposition. Regardless, this moment has placed Ethiopia in an increasingly tense situation. So what's the solution? What's my take on this? You see, the problem in Ethiopia is essentially a struggle between those who want more power to the federal government and those who want more power to the states. It's not so much that Ethiopia's form of ethnic federalism has failed, it's that it hasn't been implemented fully yet. And so if Abiy Ahmed's government truly wants to stabilize Ethiopia, it must do several things. Number one is democracy. It makes no sense to delegate power to the states when the people in those states have no democratic means to exercise that power. And so what you end up with is state representatives who are not loyal to the people in their region, but to the central government who put them there. In this case, the Tigray TPLF elite. And so to achieve this, Abiy Ahmed must set a date for the elections in consultation with the opposition, rather than postponing them indefinitely. Number two is the federal system needs to find a way to peacefully resolve disputes between the states and between ethnic groups. You see, much of the ethnic conflict has to do with land disputes about where the borders of states should be, or what ethnic group has the right to use what piece of land. This was the case with the Addis Ababa master plan. It also has to do with ethnic groups who are too small to have their own state, or who feel marginalized as a minority within a larger group's region. It's all good and well giving rights to states and regions, but people also need individual rights. It's no use living in a federalized country where you have rights within your own ethnic region, but not when you travel to other parts of the country. Number three is that the laws need to change. Many of the current laws regarding things like media freedom are still the same as with the old regime. The improved climate for journalists is totally dependent on the goodwill of Abiy Ahmed. Long-lasting democratic institutions cannot rely on the whims of any one political leader. Abiy Ahmed must enshrine protections for journalists and other checks and balances in law and not just in rhetoric, or the changes will only last as long as he still feels like a reformer. If Ethiopia is to resolve its ethnic tensions, it has to find a way to ensure equitable distribution of power between ethnic groups. Either people learn to share power, or Ethiopia could very well be the next Yugoslavia. To learn about the Libyan civil war and how the West destroyed a nation, check out my last video. Thank you to my Patreons who made this video possible. Like, share, and subscribe, 'cause this was my take.